Welcome to the Dennis Report. I'm Dennis Atchison. This stuff, water, it's everywhere. Or I remember grade 9 geography, my Canadian geography teacher saying, Canada is the second or third largest country by landmass, and we have 1/3 of the world's freshwater supply. And even way back then, crossed my mind, goodness, one day everyone's going to be coming here. Water is kind of special because it touches all of us, and it's got different perspectives and different views about what water is, if it's a right or if it's a responsibility, how we use it. There's always lots of water to water scarcity stories. It's constantly in the media. Today's guest, Elizabeth Griswold from the Canadian Bottled Water Association, will help give us better depth and better understanding on the bottled water industry. But in general terms, people don't think of it as a food product, and that'll be an interesting part of the lesson. As well, we also think of water as something that's a right. What we all need to learn is to listen better, find out good information, and come together to make better overall decisions. Media has a role to play in that because often they're looking for a conflict model or a conflict approach to something, and it needs to get past that. We need to get into how do we take care of a resource, provide lots of choice for consumers and lots of choice for people while taking care of ourselves. So water is more than just about water, it's about how everything's connected. And that'll be a piece of today's show. Welcome to the interview part of the show. Today's guest is Elizabeth Griswold. She's the Executive Director of the Canadian Bottled Water Association. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And of course, we're sitting here with our bottles of water. So maybe to get us started, why don't you do a general overview of what you do?
Primarily what I do with the association is I work with the bottled water industry to ensure that they meet not only the requirements and regulation of the bottled water industry and the regulations for Health Canada and Agriculture and Ag-Food Canada, but I also work directly with the consumer and the public to ensure that they have full understanding of what those regulations and standards are, so that when they purchase bottled water that they have complete faith and trust in the product.
Okay, maybe we should dive right in, right off the get-go. So you talk about agribusiness or Agri-Canada?
Agriculture and Ag-Food Canada.
So does that mean that this water is tested or it meets some sort of national standard?
Well, Agriculture and Ag-Food Canada is the regulatory body within the federal government that works with industry to ensure that they have a clear understanding and have in place within the industry requirements and standards to implement within industry. Health Canada and Canadian Food Inspection Agency are actually the branch of government that set regulations and enforce them. It can be a little bit confusing, but the regulations that apply to bottled water actually come from Health Canada.
Okay. So do you have an example of what those regulations would be?
Yes. The Canadian Food and Drug Act apply to bottled water throughout Canada. It not only applies to bottled water, but it applies to all food products. And where it gets very confusing for the consumer is that whatever regulations apply to all food products also applies to bottled water. Then there's very specific regulations within the Food and Drug Act that apply to bottled water. So you will have very specific regulations for bottled water within Division 12, but then there's other divisions within the regulations, and I'm probably getting into more detail than needed, but there's labeling requirements. There's also testing requirements. So bottled water is also required to meet the drinking water guidelines that apply to tap water. So all of the guidelines that apply to tap water also apply to bottled water. So the same standards that are applied to tap water also apply to bottled water. Plus, the packaging requirements for all food products also apply to bottled water. And then the testing is monitored by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency.
So, and there's 1,000 directions we could wander off just from that alone. And it sounds technical, but it is technical. So that isn't a bad thing. Joe Q, typical consumer, would see a bottle of water and it's simple. But they might look at another product on the grocery store shelf and see that a whole bunch of work has gone on behind the scenes, but somehow they don't apply the same rigor or perception to bottled water. So you're helping to deepen that, which is great. But people think water is water, but unless you're Dr. O, who will pray to water and change the crystals and stuff and start to be aware of how water is us and we are water. It's just the whole idea that it's a product, it meets standards, has to be handled a certain way, packaged a certain way. So is this a food product more than just something that flows down the stream?
It is defined worldwide as a food product. So not only is the product in the bottle defined as a food product, but the facility that it is manufactured in has to meet standards for a food processing facility. The container itself has to meet food grade requirements, and the product itself is tested for over 160 different parameters, and it's tested on a daily basis. And that's where a lot of this misinformation about bottled water is out there, not only in the media, but on social media as well. So there is a huge amount of misinformation about bottled water out there.
Yeah.
And yes, you're right, we can go in 1,000 different directions.
Yeah. Okay, let's play with a definition of water, if we can even get there. So a lot of people would think that this all comes from the same source, or that it's water and it doesn't have a bunch of different descriptions. So why don't you teach us what that's like in your industry for the different versions of water? It's a mineral water, sparkling water, tap water, or spring water, all that business.
Well, there are basically two different types in general of bottled water. You're going to have a processed water or a natural water. A processed water is defined as a water that comes from a municipal source.
Okay.
Typically a municipal source. But basically it is a water that has been processed through reverse osmosis or distillation. And the source product and the finished product do not resemble each other in any way. It basically has been changed completely. Everything has been removed from that water. So you've stripped all of the minerals, every content, every chemical that has been put in, that is in the water, and removed it.
And that's called processed water.
Processed water. It will be distilled water,
Okay.
reversed osmosis water.
Yeah.
Often you'll find it on the market as remineralized water, where they have stripped everything from the water and then reintroduced their own special formula of minerals into it. So they've branded it that way. Then you will have the natural waters, which will be a spring water or a mineral water. In Canada, we don't really have that much mineral water that would be considered potable, because the mineral content would be quite high.
Okay.
Most of our mineral water sold in Canada is imported here from typically Europe.
Okay.
In Canada, the definition of spring water is that the mineral content is anywhere from or up to 250 parts per million of total dissolved solids. Those are the minerals in the water, and you can have it as high as 500 parts per million. If you have it between 250 to 500, you can also label that mineral water if you choose to. But once you identify a source as mineral water in Canada, or an import, if you've identified it as mineral water, you can't change it. You have to continue to identify that on the label as mineral water. It's up to the individual bottler on how they're going to particularly market that and label that product. Most water sold in Canada, that is bottled water, 92% of it sold in Canada is spring water.
Okay.
Very little of it is an actual processed water.
Okay. The to follow that a little bit, how many of those would exist in Canada? How many processors or bottlers would there be in Canada, roughly? Is there 500, 1,000?
Between 500 to 1,000. I would say closer to about 500 to 600.
Okay. And do you have any sense of, because bottled water has become pretty successful product on grocery shelves. Municipal water systems will continue to struggle from time to time because of aging infrastructure. But people think that, does it outsell milk? Does it outsell Coke? You know, that sort of, or is it a small percentage of the amount of, do you have any sense of that on
Bottled water has just recently increased its sales over the sales of soft drinks, which tells you that Canadians are becoming more aware of what they're putting in their body, and that when they're reaching for a beverage, they're reaching for something that is a healthy beverage. And what we have found in the industry is that consumers are now turning to bottled water in place of beverages that are high in calories, that are high in sugar content. And to me, that's a good thing.
Yep. Maybe to follow that theme a little bit, a lot of those people would also have taps in their houses. So it's interesting they would be buying bottled water and not using the municipal source water. Do you get into that business at all?
Well,
Or
there's many reasons
discussion?
people are drinking bottled water. Some of them are drinking bottled water because they like the taste better. They're drinking it because it's more convenient when they're away from home. Some people drink both bottled water and tap water. It just depends on whether they drink it when they're at home. They drink tap water when they're at home. They drink bottled water when they're away from home because they prefer bottled water for its convenience, and they'd rather have that other than, let's say, a soft drink.
Yeah.
And personally, I will drink tap water and I will drink bottled water. It just really depends on whether it's convenient for me to drink the tap water or bottled water. It really comes down to personal choice.
Yep. So it's growing in sales. It's an industry that is regulated as a food product, which leaves some of the marketing end of it, which can be kind of tough because there's been all kinds of reaction to the plastic, whether it's a pop bottle or whether it's a water bottle. There's a reaction to the plastic, but you've made industry changes to that too.
The industry has a very specific goal. We work very closely with government, whether it's federal, provincial, or municipal government levels, on the actual recycling. As an industry, and I'm referring to the plastic beverage containers. So we work closely with the soft drink industry and the juice industry to increase beverage container recycling. As a bottled water industry, our goal is 100% recycling of all beverage containers. And until we hit that goal, we're not going to stop. So we have been working across Canada to achieve this goal. And the recycling rates in Canada are very impressive when you look around the world in the recycling rates. Our national average for recycling is 70%. And it's something to be really proud of. Do we have work to do still? Absolutely. But in New Brunswick, the recycling rates in New Brunswick are very impressive and something to be proud of. It's anywhere from 83 to 85%. So people in New Brunswick should be very proud, but there's still work to be done. What we have done as an industry is the areas that are weak are the multi-dwelling apartments, industrial, commercial, and institutions, and most importantly, the public space recycling. When a person is out in public and they're choosing to drink a beverage in a single-serve container, they need convenience. Where there is a public trash can, they need to be able to choose between throwing that container away or putting it in a recycling bin. And that public space recycling is an area where the industry is working very hard to improve. And we've done pilots across Canada, and we have seen recycling rates jump 20% just from public space recycling improvements.
So that helps on the person's behavior because they've got that option in front of them rather than just throw it in the garbage, because that was my only choice I had and I didn't want to carry around the empty anymore. Back to the plastic with the bottle. Business I used to be in a long time ago had to deal with water bottles, you know, your team water bottle, that kind of thing. A lot of buzz about plastic and water and sunlight and breaking down of plastic and things like that. So you know, wander into that a little bit because things have changed. And to give it a context, it isn't just water. There's lots of products that are contained in plastic, and you can think of your tomato soup, and it's plastic lined, and there's all kinds of issues with the acidity and the tomato breaking down the plastic there. But the Bottled Water Association or industry got a lot of attention about 5 or 6 years ago on that stuff. So can you speak to if the plastics changed or what the safety was in the first place, or independent studies? Or
Yes, and you're
referring to the bisphenol A, referred to, the acronym is BPA.
Yeah.
That has been a very hot issue. There's been a lot of activists that have made this a big issue, and it continues to be an issue. And I'm very well aware of what's going on, both within Canada and internationally. Bisphenol A is very safe for the consumer at the current level of exposure. It continues to be brought to the attention of various regulatory bodies throughout the world. Currently, the World Health Organization is reviewing the various plastics and the effects on health. They have just assembled an expert panel that is going to be reviewing it. They have released a report stating the different types of chemicals they will be reviewing. And within this summary that they did release, they specifically stated that bisphenol A is not going to be part of this review based on all of the studies that have been done around the world, including their own that was done, because it is confirmed that it is safe. So they're not even going to be studying this because they have concluded it is safe. Health Canada has done numerous studies, independent on their own, on canned foods, which concluded it was safe. They have done studies on soft drinks. They've done studies on bottled water. Every one of these studies, which has been quite extensive, have concluded it is safe. They did restrict it in regulation for baby bottles, primarily because the baby bottles were being misused by parents putting it in the microwave and heating it. And that was never the intention for those baby bottles.
Okay, so it's obvious there's a history with this topic because of all the energy around it with activists doing what they do. But then there's an issue of public trust with is what I'm being told accurate? So the World Health Organization is saying we're not going to even study it because all the stuff that comes before our study shows that there's no need to study it because it's safe. You spoke of it in general terms, meaning that it's safe for human consumption. Is there a number that goes with that? Is there, you know, parts per million thing like you did at the beginning?
Well, it's based on body weight.
Okay.
And or individual's body weight, and we are able, as adults for our size, to ingest 500, I believe it's 500 milligrams per our body weights a day. And
do we flush it out too, or
it
does it stay?
stays in our body less than 24 hours, and our body will flush it out within 24 hours. So if we were to stop ingesting it within a 24-hour to 3-day period, completely stop, it would be eliminated from our body.
So I was always curious why.
Now, one thing I need to make very clear, which is often misrepresented in the media, and I don't think it's intentional, I think it's just because they're not aware. This particular plastic, PET, has absolutely no BPA in it at all.
Okay.
So frequently you'll see an article about BPA in the media, and then they'll show a photograph of this bottle.
And the two don't fit.
Absolutely.
So what does the other one look like? Is it
It's the polycarbonate bottle.
It's the hard water bottle that you see sports teams with a lot of times, or
No, it's the water cooler bottle. But those bottles are
Indoors.
properly, yeah, they're indoors, usually not in sunlight, so it's not going to break down. The bottler, through the programs that CBWA has in place, has very specific requirements on how they sanitize those bottles. The temperatures never reach the levels that would cause the bottle to leach.
That goes back to it being a food product, going through certain processing things
Yeah.
that's hit certain federal regulations. So.
Yes, and we monitor how they bottle or how they sanitize the bottle. We inspect their washers and the temperatures, how they sanitize the equipment, how they maintain the equipment.
And when you say we, you mean the association?
Yes, the CBWA. We send inspectors out to every single bottler in their facility every year. And I've worked hard for my nickname in the industry over the past 23 years, and we're quite strict.
Yeah. Yeah, I could just see an independent, not an independent, but a member who runs out of Moncton or runs out of PEI. I think, oh, here comes somebody from the association, make sure we're hitting certain standards.
Yes, and we also require every bottle facility to have a certified plant operator on staff. So.
Tied to this, is it always plastic or, beers and glasses?
We do have some bottled water that's in glass. It's just not as easily recycled. I mean, it can be recycled. There's just not as much after product requirement for the glass product.
So you guys try your best, but you're an association compared to an industry that's owned and operated like a Coca-Cola or something with all their water divisions. They can control more of their outcomes because they produce and distribute, where you're an association, so you're like a network of independent operators trying to get them to have some standard of behavior and range. So it'd be really hard to get them all to convert to glass. I know in New Brunswick we struggle with glass recycling because we don't have scale in order to make it worthwhile to get to market. So it makes some sense we can do plastic recycling now, so that completes the cycle or the pattern of all the.
Well, the industry is fairly standardized with the plastics. It's typically a polycarbonate or PET that is used by the industry, and that's worldwide. And as far as the recycling, it's all done through the provincial stewardships. And as an industry, we work very closely with the individuals' provincial stewardships. Almost every provincial stewardship around Canada, our different board members are involved and sit on that board. So we have a lot of input on the stewardship programs across Canada.
So thanks for coming and doing this show, because what's striking my mind is public education would be really difficult because you're going up mainstream media in a way. So bottled water in some ways has got a positive view, and in other ways people have been chipping at it in terms of reputation. Then how would you have a way of getting your message out that didn't look like it was totally self-interest?
We ended up doing a campaign about a year and a half ago on social media. We redid our website. We have a Twitter account now, and we also have Facebook. And we've been able to get quite a bit of our information out that way.
School programs, anything like that? Or, I mean, you're under-resourced, you're a network, 1 or 2 staff out of an office in Toronto. Like, how do you get the message out?
We have done school programs in the past. There's not enough of us, as you've said, to get the message out. I have actually been a guest lecturer at universities before, been very effective and enlightening on both sides. Just very difficult to get out there and get that message.
Yeah. So what's the biggest myth you'd like to debunk? Or is there like several biggest myths? Because you'd be in a lecture hall, you'd have young people coming at you. Young people are aware of environmental stuff. They'd see plastic water bottles like Tim Hortons empty cups down the side of the street. And
there's so many different misperceptions out there, and I would definitely say part of it is the resource management. Part of it is the recycling.
What do you mean by resource management?
That they have the belief that we are draining the water resource.
Well, speak to that a little bit. It's like, oh yeah, there's some guy who's got a garage and he's got a bottled water operation and he's just running the tap and putting the big jug underneath it.
Well, that's even another topic, and that comes back down to the regulatory side.
Yeah.
And that would never pass regulation.
Yeah.
They would absolutely fail an inspection both from the manufacturing side, that they wouldn't pass the plant inspection for a food facility, nor would they pass the testing requirements.
Yeah, because it's a food product, not
Exactly,
just
they would
a
just
basement
completely
operation.
fail.
Yeah, and I said some guy, could be some girl too, you know, like anybody could get into the business. But speak to the amount of water that you're draining water tables, or that, you know.
To put it in perspective, the bottled water industry across Canada, on average, uses 0.02% of water that is available in Canada. And when you put that to comparison of what agriculture uses, they use 70% of water.
When you guys do those comparative stats, do you get into fracking, or do you get into the impact of fracking of the Alberta and the tar sands, oil sands stuff?
We
or-
haven't made that comparison.
Okay,
No,
probably fine just to leave it be. Because those industries, when criticized by activists, really get into the amount of water used for the product generated.
Yeah.
Where this is a product used for the sake of human consumption. So it didn't generate a lot of waste. It went directly to people who would buy it.
And we do have studies that are just about to be released out of Europe for the bottled water industry and out of the US for carbon footprint.
Okay.
And there has been a lot of information out there by activists that reference that it takes 5 liters of water to make 1 liter of bottled water, and that's absolutely inaccurate.
So where would they get that from?
I'm
Any
not
idea?
quite sure. Because all of the studies that have been done out of Europe and out of the US are showing very different results. And these are actually documented results from probably over 200 bottlers that have actually shown from their own operations and documented through a very specific method and protocol that their water usage is at least 20% of what they're claiming. But I don't have the report quite yet. It should be released the end of this month. There's actually meetings happening as we're speaking, where all of the results are being presented.
So this is about how much water is used to generate a bottle of water?
Yes.
Be interesting if we compared everybody that way.
And I think it's coming that way. In Europe, they're already starting to implement that, where you have to put it on the food label for all foods, how much it takes to produce a patty of hamburger or pound of hamburger.
Yep.
What does it produce, or what does it cost? What is the water footprint to grow a pound of potatoes?
Yeah, it's like we've expanded from the carbon footprint to the water footprint. And there's all kinds of work done on the land footprint, like how many hectares does it take to support a human, and the carrying capacity of the planet, and all that.
And I think
stuff.
it's really important information, and there has to be a very specific method used that is used for all food, and the protocol has to be appropriate as well.
So we'll all be vegetarians one day, because it takes an awful lot of corn and a lot of water to grow a cow.
I think a lot of people are heading in that direction.
Sort of that theme. Back to the amount of water it takes to make a bottle of water, which is it's a fun concept to play with, and then to apply it across the board to other industries. But would it have come from the fact that, what was the study? It was 3 to 1 or 4 to 1, 1 liter to make a liter. So the water itself is self-evident. So you didn't take a liter of water to make a liter of water, whether it's processed or spring water, if I've got your definitions right. So does it come from the packaging, or does it come from the delivery aspects or the shipping
The
aspects?
protocol and the methods would include everything, including the delivery to the store or to the consumer.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious about that, 4 to 1 ratio or 3 to 1 ratio compared to, if you look at any other product, you can see all these different parts have to come together to make the one product, whereas water, it's water. You don't muck with it other than you process it a bit.
And the water that is used in the carbon footprint, including the water footprint, it would all include being taken to any water involved, getting it to the consumer.
Interesting. So with your travels then, do you have a great story where there was kind of a breakthrough, whether it's a school system recycling something or an industry-wide recycling program, or because the manufacturer is also tagged because their logo's on it, is also tagged with seeing that product floating in a stream, and then it's photographed, and here's all these plastic water bottles in the water, you know, floating, which isn't the manufacturer's thing, it's the user, right? But people will see it, and it's just like the Tim Hortons stuff or the McDonald's stuff, and you'd see it in the streets in the litter, and they'd want to blame the industry for not the person's individual use to put it away in a container.
That is something that really, personally, and I've been referred to as the bag lady before. When I'm out and I see a bottle, an empty bottle on the side of the road or on when I'm walking, my instinct is to pick it up and put it in a backpack that I have. That is a pet peeve that I have, and it really, the industry has a responsibility, government has a responsibility on the recycling end, and the consumer has a responsibility. And everybody should, consumer, they need to recycle, they need to understand their responsibility on the recycling end. Industry and government need to understand their responsibility is to make it convenient for recycling. And if you're out in the middle of the wilderness and you've got an empty bottle, don't throw it on the trail. Put it in, carry it, or put it in a backpack and throw it away, or recycle it when you're done, when you're back where there's a recycling facility. Or
all the common sense stuff.
Yeah.
We read a lot in the media these days as municipal, changing direction a bit. Municipal water systems struggle. St. John here in New Brunswick, sometimes Moncton, will have boil orders. Stuff. Does a bottled water industry, does it work as a network, or does it left to independent operator to go in and help out? Also, is that a marketing opportunity for them? Is it a chance for them to make more money because there's a problem and we've got these big containers of water, so you see the trucks back up, all these big containers, water unloaded? Is it, when there's natural disasters and it improves the GDP, that goofy measure of things? Or is it the opposite, that they come in, they're part of the community, and they make things, smooth them out and make sure the community gets through a bump?
It's a really sensitive time when there's emergency crisis, emergency situation. The industry, their preference is to go in and help, make donations. An example is
Walkerton? Or would that have been too
oh,
soon?
no, Walkerton was very critical.
Yeah.
And then shortly after that, you had the cryptosporidium outbreak in the Red River area in Saskatchewan. And then you had the situation with flooding in Vancouver. All of those situations, CBWA coordinated donations of bottled water. And it got to the point specifically in Vancouver where the donations couldn't come fast enough because you had over 2 million people in Vancouver on a boil order issue. And I couldn't get enough donations in there. That I had made special arrangements with the federal government to allow trucks to come in from the US and clear customs. I had a special letter from the federal government allowing these trucks from bottlers that I knew in the States to get bottles of water into the Vancouver area for donations. And we don't publicize that we're donating these products.
And that's because?
Because we don't want to look like we're opportunist.
Although we're doing it now, which is fine. But to me that would be one of those...
But it's not during that moment. During that crisis, we absolutely will not. And then what is another concern during that crisis is that these donations get into the proper hands. So we want to make sure that the local government is involved, that these donations go to the community center, and that the provincial government is responsible, or the municipal government is responsible for handing those donations out, and that those donations go to people that are in the homeless shelters.
Yeah,
because they're the ones who can't get into the elderly in the senior homes, because they're the ones who cannot afford to go out and buy the water.
Yeah, trusted distribution mechanism.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the people who can afford to go and buy it in the stores, we let them go and buy it in the stores. The people who cannot afford to go out and buy it in the stores, then that's where we want our donations to go.
Touch it that way.
Yeah.
The that whole point about the opportunistic thing, which is fascinating because the intent might have been there's a crisis and we need to rally around the crisis. Also, the fascinating thing, it's water. It touches all of us. Like water is this universal right. Some people say it's a universal right compared to it's a product that you buy on the shelf. But it's all of the above. It's a mix of all those pieces and parts. But the storytelling at some point for CBWA needs to include that stuff because that would offset the perception that, oh, you've taken something out of the ground and you're making money on it, which is no different from fishing or.
And that's an important point.
Yeah.
But if the industry isn't there making money during the good times where there's not a crisis, we can't be there to help out when there is a crisis.
Yeah.
So we can't be there only during the emergency crisis. We also have to be there as an industry making money during our regular business
it's like
time.
regular business stuff, like
Yeah.
any other industry.
Yeah.
Like growing wheat or like pork or all that stuff.
Yes, and they all use water
Hmm.
in part of their production.
So in some ways, you've got a guaranteed market because people always need water. The difference is whether or not they buy it from a store or whether they buy it from their taxes through the municipal water system, which then gets into infrastructure and stuff. You must have some other, how do we compare internationally? Because you're also part of an international network around water. So how is Canada that way? Do you have a context for it? Meaning, where are we in relation to other countries that bottle water and how it's perceived?
Very similar. There are, I would say that as far as growth, we're very similar to the US and Europe. Latin America and Asia growing far faster, only because of their economy.
Mm-hmm.
And it compares to other industries in the same markets. Australia is about the same as the US and Canada. As far as media, almost the same.
So the perception's the same.
Yeah.
There's some people who will be for it and see it as part of a whole range of choices, and other people who will say you can't do that because it's water and water's a right, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but in Latin America and Asia, bottled water is considered part of the solutions because
Okay.
their municipal water systems are not as advanced as ours here.
Okay. Or some of our systems here are really old and need to be upgraded, and money for infrastructure is like pulling teeth, even though it's something that affects everybody.
And frankly, as an industry, we really believe that our infrastructures need to be upgraded, and we support that completely.
So it's like a balance of all the parts, because one of the fears must be that it's all going to get privatized. So access to water is going to be privatized through bottled water companies, for example.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I think bottled water is a beverage. Tap water is a utility water. You need it to wash your clothes, to take care of household errands,
Yeah.
and less than 1% of municipal water is used for human consumption. So how is bottled water ever going to replace that?
Yeah, that's a good point, because of scale. A lot of people in typical terms don't have a sense of the scale. They just know what they use, and then they know when something goes wrong.
100% of this is used for human consumption. 1% of municipal water is used for human consumption. There is really little comparison.
That would really resonate in New Brunswick because of some industry here uses a lot of water to produce its product. Moosehead Breweries is one example out of St. John, and Irving with the pulp and paper mill uses a lot of water in its processing things. So a nice comparison to go with 1%. Are there any hot topics on the horizon that the association needs to start to address, in future? Because world's population is doubling by 2047. I remember in geography class in grade 9, the geography teacher saying Canada is like the second or third largest country by land mass, and we have 1/3 of the world's freshwater supply. Then all you can think of is, oh goodness, everyone's coming here at some point.
I think that the biggest issues that as a society that we need to deal with regarding water in general is just the conservation of it. and that people need to understand the value of water and to conserve it.
Maybe switching in another direction, because it's water and because it's a common denominator, it touches all of us. If you can speak to it, maybe you can't. The political dimension to things, trying to get legislatures or federal governments to do what you just said, that be more aware of water, its conservation, its use. Do you have any chance for a joint program between CBWA and federal government, provincial governments, with whether it's although we educate ourselves to the nth degree, with we got umpteen studies done, we just can't seem to change behaviors.
We're already working with them on it.
Yeah.
There's the Great Lakes Compact and Agreement with the U.S., and there's Quebec and Ontario plus 8 states in the U.S. for the Great Lakes in the St. Lawrence Seaway. And there's already huge agreements going on with that in the International Joint Commission.
So what do those involve? Like, what is it? That's the title of it, but what is it?
It's involving the conservation of the Great Lakes and preserving the water levels and the quality of the water. A lot of good things happening there. And bottled water is involved in it. We're still considered a consumptive use. And we're involved in making sure that the Great Lakes is preserved for generations.
Because in some ways, in public relations terms, you guys would have much more visibility, even though you're a percent of a percent kind of the usage rate. But everyone knows about bottled water. It's high visibility, it's got a symbol, it's got story behind it. Compared to municipal water systems, it gets lost in the ether of municipal governments and how hard it is to get decisions made in municipal governments, that sort of thing. Never mind secure funding for infrastructure changes for 100-year-old pipes buried underneath streets.
Well, and we had put into the Great Lakes Annex that you can't export water from the Great Lakes in bulk. So anything larger than 22 liters cannot be taken out of the Great Lakes, which is perfect.
So funny mix for you, because there's this network of association of all these independent kind of operators who try to act as a collective to some degree. The product itself is confused with anything else related to water. Trying to do public education on recycling and stuff. We sit in the world in a certain place. You said it's more or less the same. So I want to get into more your experiences with work, because we've gone through like the industry. We've done this lovely big broad strokes of the industry, where it fits and where it could go. But you've had 20 some odd years experience in this thing. You must have seen a lot of changes from where it was to where it is today.
Oh, yes. 23 years ago when I got in the industry, well, goodness, 27 years ago when I started in the industry, it was a cottage industry. There was not a lot of women in the industry. I started as a booth babe. Kind of an interesting way to start in the bottled water industry. And then I started running the Ontario Bottled Water Association, which then became the Canadian Bottled Water Industry in 1992. And then from that we developed the International Council of Bottled Water Associations, which I also run. It has definitely become a much larger, focused industry. We're recognized on the international level with the World Health Organization. The federal government in Canada respects us and acknowledges the Canadian Bottled Water Association. So we have quite a bit of input on regulatory issues. It has changed quite a bit. A lot of consolidation. The industry, bottled water industry, represents about 85% of bottled water sold in Canada. So it's been quite significant on its direction.
So where should it go in the future? Because it's anything we read in the media and water, because we'll confuse the stories, right? We won't separate bottled water from the Great Lakes. There was a story in the media not long ago about one of the Great Lakes shrinking. There's all kinds of stories at the beginning of cottage time where this is where the dock used to be, but now I'm standing on dry bed because the the water's receding. So people in general get a sense of the scarcity of it, and they know how fundamental it is to existence.
And it's easy to blame the bottled water industry.
Well, it's
and they've backed off on that recently. It's not the bottled water industry's fault. Because, again, we use 0.02% of all water that's available. And we closely monitor. We do very extensive hydrogeological studies, and we monitor those. Because if we dry up our resources, we're out of business. And we have multi-million-dollar facilities. So it would not be in our best interest to use up the resource that we need for our livelihood.
And I don't imagine the same pressure comes to bear. Maybe it does, and we just don't hear about it the same way. When it comes to Moosehead breweries and the amount of water they use here in New Brunswick, for example, or any of the pulp mills, or any other industry that's kind of water intensive.
And I'm not familiar whether they use a municipal source or if they have their own underground source. So I'm not familiar with what their source itself is. You had mentioned what direction the association is going in. We work very closely with Agriculture and Ag Food Canada, and this is where they come into play with working with us. We have been working very closely with them for the last 3 years on developing our internal technical resources. So we require all of our members to have a third-party audit, and with that we provide them technical training. So we have a model code, and the model code I describe as our 20,000-foot description of the industry. So it's an introduction to the bottled water industry. It's available to anybody. It's a public document, and it is a 25-page document that talks about facility, resource management, the analysis for the water. It talks about the packaging. It talks about managing your facility. So everything you need to know about the bottled water industry and getting into it, it gives you a quick overview. And then once someone gets into the industry, then we also have what we refer to as the bottled water food safety practices. And this is good manufacturing practices plus a HACCP protocol. And HACCP is basically a hazard analysis critical control points, which gets into specific details on issues in your food facility that can cause health problems and quality control problems in your in your product itself. And if you fail the HACCP part, your plant is a hazard for your product safety. So that's the area that I focus on primarily with our bottlers. And then we also have an audit handbook, which will take a bottler step by step through their facility on what they need to focus on to ensure that they pass our third-party inspection. And then we have our certified plant operator program. I know, it's very detailed.
Yeah, you're really into a lot of the production detail.
So this is a guide for how someone needs to study and what they need to study and understand. And it's a manual.
Before they get into the business of it.
Yes, and then they have to do an exam that I typically oversee, or one of my staff, and they have to pass this exam. And then they're a certified plant operator. And then they have to continue their accreditation and get re-examined or re-accredited every 3 years. And this is mandatory to remain a member of CBWA. And this is where Agriculture and Ag Food Canada join with in partnership with CBWA, and they approve all these documents to ensure that we meet federal requirements.
So it's a interesting mix, because there's the industry stuff that you've just spoken to, all the technical aspects and certification aspects of it, but then there's Joe Q person on the street and their perception of it, and there's a gulf there, or a gap there, obviously, about where that comes from, how it's processed, why you pay the money you do for it. But it is a range of choices, consumer products. I'm just curious about, we've got maybe 10 minutes or so left. I want it to be a bit hotter, the topic. So maybe the activist stuff, if you want to wander into that, if you can find a way, or maybe a story. You shared a story earlier about going to do a TV interview and getting some results at the last minute as you're driving to the TV interview. That's a good story.
And it had to do with the PET packaging. It was probably about 5-6 years ago, where there was a professor out of Germany, out of Heidelberg, Germany, actually. And he is also affiliated with Canada. And he was talking about a chemical called antimony. And I was on my way to the CTV studios for an interview, and I had been working closely with Health Canada about antimony and some studies that they were doing. And I knew their results were or they were supposed to be in any time now. So I called the head of their chemical bureau and I asked him, listen, I'm on my way to CTV, and do you have the results in yet? And it was like within 5 minutes of me getting to the studio. He says, yes, absolutely. I just got the studies in yesterday, and there's no antimony issue with bottled water. I've got the studies. And he said, you can quote me. Antimony in bottled water is not a health risk to humans. It is perfectly healthy. I said, okay, thank you. And this was on this interview was going to play for 24 hours on the 24-hour news station.
Yeah.
So they had me put into this little tiny, probably 3 foot by 3 foot black room where you're staring into the abyss and you're talking to nobody, but the camera's right there. So I'm hearing the anchorman speak to me, and she asked me that question, and I said, oh, that's interesting. I just got off the phone with Health Canada, and this is what they told me. Interview stopped right then and there. It was live. That was the only time it played. The issue was dead at that point. So that is just an example of the good relationship that we have with Health Canada, and how that particular relationship assisted us in nipping it in the bud as far as accelerating an issue that was really a non-issue.
So it sounds like many other industries where there's a certain perception created over here, and then there's another perception created over there, and trying to find clarity or truth gets to be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, and there's 2 other issues with the activists that I frequently disagree with, and the misperception that they put out there. One is often they will take recycling rates from the U.S., which used to be 23%, now we're around 32%, because they've made a real effort in the U.S. on their recycling. But they would take U.S. recycling rates and arbitrarily apply them to Canada when they're talking about Canada. And they would say, in the past, they've stopped doing it recently, but they would say, oh yes, the recycling rates are 23%. Then I would hear this and I would immediately address it going, excuse me, the recycling rates in Canada nationally are 70%. That's a huge difference, and I disagree that they would take U.S. recycling rates and arbitrarily apply them to Canada.
But interesting, because when we spoke to recycling earlier, it's a responsibility of the individual to make sure that they recycle the product. But
a part of it is the consumer. I think that it is a joint effort between industry, government, and the consumer, because if you don't have all 3 of those parts involved, it's going to fail.
Yeah, because so it's more complex than what that linear story. It'd be fun one day to do a show on media, and have people like yourself and Randy Hatfield from the Human Development Council in St. John, because they're forever trying to get the accuracy of their story out, but media is usually looking for a conflict model of some kind in how they portray their story.
Well, and then part of their problem is that most of them have lost their research division. So they don't have a lot of backup for their research.
You mean media has lost their research, so they're kind of flying, which is also
Yes.
true. They don't have time, unless you're a high-profile program like a W5 or a Fifth Estate or something.
Yeah. And then another issue with the activists, and I know we're running out of time, but
No, that's good.
is that they often quote the price of bottled water, and they'll say that it's $2 for a single bottle. Yes, it is if you go into a convenience store and you buy it individually, but most consumers buy it by the case. They'll go to Costco and they'll buy 35 bottles in a case. And according to Nielsen, AC Nielsen, the average price for a bottle of water this size is anywhere from 15 to 18 cents a bottle. That is far less than the $2 that are often quoted by the activists.
Yeah, and then you would also get into whatever else you buy in that same convenience store and what the markup is, because that's
Yes.
the convenience store's business, hence
a great point.
convenience store.
Yes.
Yeah, I've always wondered why, if we're going to generalize something, why we don't generalize it completely across. Similar theme would be people in general say they want smaller government, there's too many, civil service is too large compared to the population, these odd measures, you know, but no one does the same thing. Well, why do we need so many real estate agents in a town of 50,000, or why do we need so many lawyers? Or if they want to talk ratios, then apply that across the board, and then you might get a distribution economy rather than a growth economy,
Yes.
if that makes sense. Any last thoughts? Stuff we should begin to think about wrapping up?
Well, there's a
We-
couple things that are going on, or one thing in particular happening in New Brunswick, and I think that it will be very positive on the recycling side. There's a new pilot project that is coming into play starting in September, and it should make the depots, the recycling depots in New Brunswick, very convenient for the consumer. And it'll be interesting to see how this turns out. And everybody involved is going to be excited. I don't have too many details right now,
Okay.
but I know that it will be more convenient, and it'll be easier for the consumer to get in and out of the depots. And I know it's been an issue in New Brunswick.
Yeah, getting this stuff to market, doing the collection centers, it tends to be one of those Saturday afternoon has to be committed to just getting your refundables and recyclables
Yeah, and
done.
it'll be in a better facility and cleaner, and the in and out will be much more convenient.
Fun. And we'll finally get the complete circle of a product rather than just got it to market and then it's gone.
Yes.
Good. Well, thanks for this. We'll wrap up now. Thanks for watching today, and as always, be good and have fun and love each other. Thanks for watching.